today's scripture is Matthew 5:21 through 26. You have heard that it was said to those of old, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment." But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. And whoever says, "You fool," will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Amen. And you may be seated. And if you would, once again, join me in prayer. Spirit, I pray that you continue to work in our hearts and our minds, and that you would open our ears and soften our hearts. And I ask that you allow the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart to be pleasing and acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Y'all are all Christians, kind of, right? So none of y'all have ever been angry before. Have any of y'all been angry? Yeah. Anybody never not been angry? Hey, way to go. First service, we have people that are like, "I've never been angry." So I'll I'm talking about lying next week. But it happens. We all get angry at some point in our life, right? And when we're angry, oh, yeah. So there's a story. It's one of the first stories in the Bible. It's from Genesis chapter 4. It's the story of two brothers. Any of y'all have a brother or sister? Yes. Never got angry with our siblings, right? My brothers and I, we were always just perfect little children. My mom, who's watching this, will verify that I'm lying later. These two brothers, Cain and Abel. Cain was the older brother, and he was a farmer, so he produced food from the ground. And one day he decided he was going to take part of his food and take it to God and give it to him as an offering. And God, he said, "Good job, Cain. Thanks, I appreciate it." And Abel, the younger brother, he raised sheep. He was a shepherd. And as his sheep were being born, he took the firstling of the sheep, the very first sheep that were being born, and he took it to God as an offering. And God said, "Abel, that is so amazing. Thank you so much. This is the best offering ever." I mean, God doesn't say best offering ever. But Abel's offering was up here, and Cain's offering was down here. And while this is a whole different sermon, the reason was because Abel gave God the first of what he had before the harvest was in, and Cain gave out of the excess. And so God knew the difference in their hearts, and so God praised Abel, and he was still happy with Cain's offering. But Cain, being a good brother, couldn't stand that his brother was praised more than he was. Never had sibling rivalry, have we? Yeah. I say we're not perfect. I'm not perfect, and I don't expect you to be. And I can't say sibling today. There we go. And Cain couldn't stand it. He couldn't stand that his brother had gotten more recognition, not just from his parents, but from God, the creator of the heavens and the earth. Could you imagine that if your older brother or younger sister got praised by God and you were just like, "Meh, good job"? Yeah, that causes a little anger. And so Cain, he allowed that anger to fester and to stir, and he ended up doing what to Abel? Do y'all remember? He killed him. And God comes up to Cain and says, "Cain, where is your brother?" And one of the most famous verses from the Old Testament, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Like, y'all ever felt like that when you were kids, right? Like, am I in charge of them? No, I don't know where he's at, God. I don't know what's going on. And God says, his bones are crying out from the ground because one man's anger led to another man's death. And Jesus is referencing this story here in Matthew chapter 5. But the funny thing about Jesus is when he's talking about the Old Testament, because it's very clear in the Old Testament we shouldn't murder, right? As Christians, we can all agree that we shouldn't murder people. Yes? You're with me? Okay, good. Y'all are getting better. After a year, I'm training you to respond, and you're doing well. So, My African American preacher friends, they're like, with white people, it's harder. It's like, I know, I get it. So we can all agree that murder is wrong. And I've never murdered anybody. I just want y'all to know that. I'm not going to confess, like, by the way, when I was a teenager, there was this one guy, and I just couldn't take it anymore. No, I've never murdered anybody. And so Jesus, instead of saying, good job, Justin, don't murder people, he actually takes it deeper, because Jesus isn't looking at the outer actions that we have towards people, but he wants to get to our inner heart. And here on the story of the Sermon on the Mount, that's what he's doing, is he's saying, yeah, of course not murdering people is good. Good job, guys. Way to not murder anybody. So if you haven't murdered anybody in your life, good job. I appreciate that. Keep it up. Don't kill anybody after you leave church today. I'd appreciate it. But Jesus continues, and this is what he says. So I'm just going to go through it a little bit at a time. In verse 21, he says, you have heard that it was of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders is liable to judgment. But I say to you, everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Huh. So I already made you confess that you got angry. So way to go. Good job. He's saying when we get angry, we become liable to the judgment of God. And this isn't a good place for us to be, because God isn't just looking at our outer actions now, but he's looking at our hearts, and he's looking and saying, man, remember that one time that you got angry when somebody cut you off and you did something that was very un-Christ-like? No, I was there. I remember that. He's saying you should not be angry. Now, I want to have a brief aside really quickly, because when I try to teach on something, such as anger, a specific topic, I want to look at the whole of what the Bible has to say about it. So really quickly, in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 26 and 27, Paul says this. Paul says, in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on you while you are angry, yet you'll give the devil a foothold. And so Paul is saying, Jesus saying, don't get angry with people, and Paul's saying, in your anger, do not sin. So there's a difference there, right? You're still following me? You can be angry and not be sinful, or you can be angry and be sinful. So there's this difference in teaching. So what does it mean to be angry and to not sin? Well, God was angry in the Old Testament. Y'all remember that? Like God was wrathful? God's anger, though, wasn't a quick anger. It was a slow anger. Think about it from God's perspective. He frees these people called the Israelites from Egypt. He leads them miraculously through the wilderness. He gives them this promised land. He provides honey and bread and manna for them. And they get there, and everything is great for one generation. Then their kids screw it up. Right? It's always the kids' fault, never the parents. The kids screw things up, and they start worshiping other gods, and then they put judges in charge of it. So they'll go, oh God, we're so sorry. The Philistines are attacking us. Send us a judge, and the judge delivers them. And they do that generation after generation after generation after generation. And finally, after multiple judges come through, what happens is they say, okay, God, the reason that we keep sinning against you is because we don't have a king. Everybody else has got a king. We want a king, God. And they get a king, and how does that work for them? Not too well, right? They get a king, Saul, he disobeys God, and they get a new king, David, and David is faithful. And then as soon as David is gone, if you read the Old Testament, David is faithful, but like half of his kingdom is spent on the run because people are trying to kill him. I'm not sure about y'all, but if you spend half your time running for your life, probably doesn't mean that everybody likes you, right? Think about that. If we were president, you got elected president, you're day one, people's going to assassinate you, you go into hiding for a little bit. You come out for a couple of years, everything's fine, and people try to kill you at the end of your reign. That was David. So for years and years, kings rule, disobedient. God still allows them to live in his promised land, still allows them to be their covenant people. Finally, after hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, he says, I can't take it anymore. And he kicks them out of the promised land. God's anger was slow to build. Because this is the way I think we can tell the difference between righteous anger and bad anger. Is anger against sin is good, but anger against something that is good is sin. So anger against something that is good, that's a sin. So when God says, I made people and we were made good, when I made creation and it was when I made the heavens and the earth, and it was, yeah, he said, I made everything, and it was good. So anger against something good is a sin, but anger against sin, that's good. So there's a difference there between anger that is sinful and anger that is good. And while some anger is good, some anger is certainly sinful. And when we think about most anger in our society, it's more of the sinful type. Jesus continues on in verse 22. He's saying, I say to you, everyone who is angry to his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. And whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. I'm not sure why they translated it like that. Y'all walk around saying the hell of fire? Anybody else use perfect? No. Anyway, it's an interesting translation. And if you have your Bible out, some of your Bibles may say raka instead of fool. And what this is saying is that Jesus is saying, if you walk around insulting people or calling them names, you are in danger of the judgments of hell. That's a pretty steep teaching, isn't it? When I think of insulting people, I don't think of grown-ups doing it because we're more mature than that, right? You don't call people names ever. I remember my days on the childhood playground when I'm like, oh, you're fat, or you're dumb, or you're ugly. Or I was really smart, so I would make up rhymes with people's names. I'd be like, oh, Kirk, he's a jerk. Or, oh, Shane, he's got no brain. Right? I was pretty quick like that. And thankfully, my parents made me Dustin, and not much rhymes with Dustin besides like Bussin, so I don't know. So nobody made fun of me. So it was like a win-win situation. And what Jesus is saying is not only should you not be angry, but you shouldn't be insulting the people. Because think about it for a second. When we come to Christ, when we get a new life in Christ, God starts to give us a new identity. I start to be less of the sinner, less of the shameful, angry person, and God starts to say, hey, you are my son, you are my daughter, I love you, you are my beloved, you are a saint, you are holy, you are righteous. And what God is doing in this process is He's putting a new identity on who we are. And He's saying, you're not like the world is anymore. You are new. Paul says you're a new creation. And when we start to say, you're an idiot,
No, it's okay.
you're a fool, or some of the worst ones come from our families, right? You're worthless, you're no good, you're a tramp, you're not worthy. What we're doing is we're devaluing people's worth. We're making them feel worth less than what God has called them. Because God has called everybody His sons and daughters, and He calls us to love everybody like that. And when we start to say you're a fool or you're whoever you are, we're taking away their God-given identity and saying, no, I know more of who you are than God does. And I don't know about y'all, but most days I wake up and I realize one thing. I'm not God. And I don't think you are either, right? No, anybody like, okay, no confessions of Godness here. Okay, good. And so when we start saying that you are unworthy, that you are unlovable, that you are dumb, what God is saying is you are devaluing my creation. You're saying one thing, and I'm saying another. And I never want to stand in contradiction to what God is saying. But man, it's so hard for us not to get angry with people sometimes, right? Especially when people insult us or our children. I mean, all you have to do is walk around Walmart. I was in Walmart on Friday, pushing my cart down the middle of the aisle. Can't believe you're in the middle of the aisle. What are you? I'm just pushing my cart, man. That never happens to y'all. Y'all always stay on the right-hand side of the lane, right? Probably. I was trying to avoid traffic. I was sitting there like justifying myself like we do when people get mad at us. I was like, well, there are people over here, so I was trying to avoid them, and all he saw was me in the middle of the aisle, and he just couldn't believe it, and I was like, but I'm big enough and mature enough now to be like, whatever, I don't care. You can be mad at me for pushing my cart in Walmart. Right? We get angry when people blow up at us. Not throw up, but blow up. We also get mad when people throw up on us, I would hope. But, you're just minding your own business, doing whatever you think you're doing, and somebody just comes and just lets it all fly. You no good little piece of poop. I have to say poop because I'm a pastor, right? And people just come and they let us have it. They're all red-faced and veiny, and none of y'all ever get that way because you're good Christians, right? And they just throw up on us, and it's easy for us to reciprocate that anger. Because by God, I was right, or I'm the pastor, or I'm Dustin, or whatever defense you want to use to justify yourself. Well, they're angry at me, and I'm just sitting here pushing my cart, minding my own business. It's easy for us to get angry when people treat us poorly. And it's easy for us to get angry when all we're surrounded with is people that complain day after day after day. Well, why didn't you do it this way? Well, I would have done it that way. Well, did you know that you could have done it like this and it would have been so much better? And as a pastor and a husband, I never hear any of that stuff, right? I think the whole church would be benefited from a verse from Paul. It's from, I got to remember, Philippians 2:14. Philippians 2:14, Paul says, do everything without grumbling or complaining. Yeah. You can ask Ashley, my wife, how well I live that verse out. But just think about that anger, that self-righteousness that we get because we're right and we know how things should be done better than you do would be so much better. And how much different from the world would we look if we could just for a second be a grateful people, right? If we could be a people that didn't complain or grumble, I mean, all I have to do is say like Donald Trump or Barack Obama, and I'm sure that would get somebody to start grumbling or complaining, right? Pick your poison. And it's easy for us to get angry. And it's easy for us to feel justified in our anger. But if we're honest with ourselves, or at least if I'm honest with me, the person that I get angry with the most isn't the guy walking down Walmart, and it's not the wife that lives in my house, or it's not my kids. It's me. The person I'm angry with the most is myself, because, my God, I am Dustin McHugh, and I am a pastor. I am a master of the divine, right? I have my master's of divinity, and I'm about to be a doctor of the ministry. So I'm like all of these, right? And I should know better than that. And we get angry with ourselves when we do silly things, and we all do silly things. And it's hard for us to forgive ourselves, but man, if God can forgive you, why can't you forgive yourself? And we have sometimes this anger and resentment towards ourselves and our past. We have this anger that just balls up within us. So who can take away our anger? Augustine, an early leader of the church, one of the foremost theologians, he was talking about it, and he said, a man trains a horse, and a person trains a camel, and a person trains a donkey, and a person trains a dog. So who can train a man? Because it's obvious that a man can train all these people, but can man train men? No. It's up to God to train us. And so he's saying that if we want to get rid of this anger, then we have to learn how to go to God and present this anger to Him, to see if it's a good anger or a bad anger, and to allow Him to begin to transform us. And this is exactly where Jesus is going in the second half of this little story, of the Sermon on the Mount. He's saying, if you make fun of people, if you insult them, you're in danger of the fires of hell. And starting in verse 23. So if you're offering your gift at the altar, and you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. First, let's start with you. At some point in your life, you have messed up. Yes? And more than likely, you probably got angry with somebody and you regret the words that you said. If this is you, what Jesus is telling us here is that you need to leave what you're doing. And you need to go and tell that person, I'm sorry. Now, when I think of people telling me to go tell others that I'm sorry, I gotta think of my kids. Because kids bicker and argue sometimes, right? And so when your kids bicker and argue, you tell them to go apologize, and you know what they do, right? Sorry. Or if they're girls, they get a little more dramatic and they got their hands on their hips. Sorry. I'm not a woman, but is there a point in your life where you learn how to like roll your eyes and flip your hair at people? And that's not the kind of apology that God is talking about here, that Jesus is calling us to. Jesus isn't calling us to go up to our people and be like, sorry, Bob. But you're really not, because you know that you were right, and you know that they were wrong, and you know that you're so much better than they are. What Jesus is telling us is that we should have a sort of confession or apology that comes from the heart, that realizes that whether we were wrong or whether we were right, that the other person was created in the image of God, and they deserve to be treated with love and respect. The type of apology that comes from a place of empathy that realizes that maybe the guy in Walmart was just having a bad day when he almost ran into me, right? When he yelled at me a little bit. Maybe it's not all about me in this world, but we can start to empathize with other people and realize that their life might not be as peachy as mine is. Because, man, most days my life is pretty peachy. It's a place, a true apology or confession is one that has compassion, that moves us in our hearts and allows us to realize that we hurt somebody else, whether intentionally or unintentionally. We're people. We mess up. We make mistakes. We do things that are dumb. I have a saying I stole from another pastor. We're all 1 second away from stupid. But each day we're trying to get closer to Jesus. And each day we're trying a little bit harder to be a little bit holier. And so then, rather than going to people and just, sorry, and walking away, let us be a people that truly mean that we regret our past actions. And whether or not somebody apologizes to you, so I want to shift it from you to other people. Because somebody has hurt you at some point in your life, right? Called you a name, put you down, belittled you. Whether or not that person has come up to you and apologized, Christ calls us to forgive that person. Now, forgiveness is not forgetting it. That's stupid. Somebody comes and does something to my kids, I'm not going to forget that. I'm going to try to forgive them eventually later when they're grown. Anyway, it takes a while for forgiveness sometimes, right? And forgiveness isn't continually bring it up. Well, remember you messed up and I forgave you, and then you messed up again and then I forgave you again. Or throwing it in their face is what forgiveness is, well, I forgave you a long time ago because you screwed up and you're just a complete mess up and I can't believe you did this again. That is not what forgiveness is. What forgiveness is means moving past the offense so that reconciliation can begin. What forgiveness does is it brings love back into the equation. One of the leading psychologists, he has a PhD in psychology, Robert Enright, has this to say about love and forgiveness. He says there's a chain reaction of evil. Hate begets more hate. Wars produce more wars. It must be broken, or we shall be plunged into the dark abyss of annihilation. Love is the only force that is capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. By its very nature, hate destroys and tears down. But by its very nature, love creates and builds up. Forgiveness is the key to building up a right relationship. And this is where Jesus is leading us in this passage about anger. In verse 24, he says, if you are angry with somebody, leave what you're doing and go and to be reconciled with them. Now, there's a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgiveness means that you're letting it go, that you're moving past the hurt. Reconciliation means that you take two parties that are warring and you bring them together and allow that relationship to be restored. Now, reconciliation takes two different people. So, it doesn't matter what you do. You can go on your hands and knees and beg and plead for forgiveness and reconciliation. The other person could walk away. That's on them. But God calls us to be a people that not only forgive, but for long for reconciliation for our relationships. Reconciliation takes a relationship that was destroyed and killed, and it gives it a new life. Reconciliation is the story of James McGee and Andrew Collins. It's a story that will be on our Facebook page in about 15 minutes. James McGee was a young African-American man that was just walking through his neighborhood one day when Andrew Collins, a young Anglo cop, stopped him and said, "What are you doing?" Andrew Collins, the cop, planted drugs on James McGee. James was arrested and sentenced. And while James the whole time said, "Look, I was innocent, these drugs weren't mine," everybody believed the white cop over the words of the African-American young man. And he was sentenced to a time in jail. James spent 4 years in prison. 4 years. After 4 years, it was finally found out that Andrew was a crooked cop, that he had been planting evidence around a crime scene so that he would look better because he was making more arrests than the other cops. And Andrew confessed to planting drugs on James. And Andrew got sentenced to 18 months in jail. James, during the time, said, "If I see him again, I will want to destroy him for what he did." If there's ever anybody, right, that has the reason to be justified in their actions for wanting to destroy somebody, I think that's a pretty good reason. But you see, in the midst of it, after he got out, James came to this church that had a halfway house program where people could come and live and work in a coffee house. And he came to know and experience the love and forgiveness of Jesus Christ. And as he was growing in his relationship and as he was working in that coffee shop, one day when Andrew got out of jail, he walked through the doors of the same coffee shop in the same church and got a job in the same place. And he said that, "I looked up and saw Andrew walking across the way, and Andrew came up to me and had 2 simple words. 'I'm sorry.'" And he said that was all it took. I could tell that he regretted his past actions. He had come to know the forgiveness of Jesus. I had come to know the forgiveness of Jesus. And if Jesus has forgiven me, then Jesus can forgive him, and I can forgive him as well. And not only were these 2 men forced to work with each other, become co-workers, but they set aside their differences and they became quick friends, realizing that their relationship could be reconciled and restored. See, each and every one of us have people in our lives that have hurt us, that have destroyed us, that have betrayed us. And it's so easy for us to hold up on that anger within us and to feel right because I was right, they were wrong. But what Jesus is calling us to do here on the Sermon on the Mount is to let go of that anger, to go to the brother or sister that has sinned against you and to say, "You know what? It's okay. We all make mistakes. God's forgiven me, I forgive you." And to try to reconcile that relationship. I was working a walk to Emmaus with a pastor's wife. Always fun to work with LGBT spouses. And as we were praying one evening, she was talking about something that happened over 20 years ago. I said, "Have you forgiven that person?" She said, "No." I said, "Would you like to?" She said, "Yes." And her husband, the pastor, a colleague, a friend of mine, came up to me after the retreat and said, "I don't know what you did or said to my wife, but she is a different person." You see, the leading cause of heart attacks at men under 55 is anger and resentment. The stress builds up in our bodies so much that our bodies cannot take it. Jesus is calling us to be a people that let go of the anger that we have in our lives, to let go of the belittling of people, and to go to Him and to go to others and say, "We're sorry, we made a mistake. Will you forgive me? Will you see me as God sees me? Can we be reconciled?" Reconciliation takes a relationship that's on the verge of destruction and brings life into it. Let us, as followers of Jesus Christ, be a people that move from places of anger to places of forgiveness and reconciliation. Let us heed the words of Jesus on the Mount. Let's pray. Jesus, I thank you that you came into this world, that you forgive us of so much. And as the east is from the west, that you separate us from our sins. And so I pray that as you have forgiven us, that you would allow us to be a people that let go of the anger and resentment and bitterness that we have in our own lives, and allow that to be transformed into forgiveness and reconciliation. So I pray for those men and women in this room that are holding on to past hurts and past grudges, that you'd allow that heart of stone to be broken, and that you'd allow forgiveness to occur. And I pray that you would help them to go to the people they have offended, or people that have offended them, and to seek a relationship of reconciliation. Help them to live in your peace and in your glory. We ask these things in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.